One more of these logic episodes after this, but today we are going to be talking about statements. And if you don't think that is fascinating, I don't know what you're doing here. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. So today I'm going to be continuing my discussion on logic and how it applies to your writing. And if you haven't listened to the 2 episodes before this one, I suggest that you do that. Because if you don't listen to it, you're not getting the full picture of what I mean by logic and how to use it in your writing. I think that you actually need all 4 of these episodes to get the whole picture so you can take those and apply it in your writing. So check them out up here if you haven't yet, or down below if you're just listening to this on audio. So in my last episode, I talked about defining things. I talked about this idea that you need to know what you're talking about before you talk about that thing. So you need to figure out the limits of that thing. You need to find out what the essential nature of that thing is. Now, with definitions, you want to be clear. You want to not be ambiguous when you write about something or when you explain something or you think about something. When you get to the core of that thing, you've achieved clarity in terms of understanding that thing. The next part of logic is statements. And before I even begin, I just want to say that statements we make about something can be true or they can be false. Now, when we look at definitions, they can be ambiguous or they can be unambiguous or clear, but statements can be true or false. And this is common sense, I would say, but at the same time, I think it's good to say it because I don't want people to forget this is an aspect of logic. So when we're building a logical argument, we're looking at the definitions, we're determining whether those definitions are ambiguous or unambiguous, and then we're making sure the statements we're making are true, and then we're going to get on to the arguments themselves in the next episode. So after we've defined what we're talking about, we are making statements about those things. And statements are exactly what they sound like. They are just a statement about something. The dog is red. Maybe we're talking about Clifford. The sun is a star. The world is your oyster. All you need is love. Now, some statements are dependent on the situation. And in many cases, we actually need to define what we're talking about before we make those statements. So what does red mean when we say that the dog is red? Some people will look at certain dogs with reddish hair and the hair is actually orange in nature, but they'll say that the dog's hair is red because we, for some reason, use that term to describe orange hair. So someone might say the dog is red, and in my mind, I might think, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. But in their mind, they're not saying that the dog is this bright red. They're actually saying that the dog is more like a fox in color. Or what if we say that the sun is a star? How we define a star will determine whether that is true in our statement or not. Or what is meant by an oyster when we say that the world is our oyster? Well, it doesn't mean that the world is an actual oyster. It means that there's a pearl that we can create if we actually engage with the world. There's a pearl out there for us to find. So it's actually a metaphorical sense of oyster rather than a literal sense. Because it would be terrifying if the world was a literal oyster. Or what is love? What is meant by love when we say that statement? So you might be thinking, well, you're making statements about things, but you're going back to definitions. It is because definitions come first, and statements are built off of definitions. What I often see is people jumping to statements when they talk about anything. And what they forget to do, or maybe they don't even know they need to do it, is figuring out what they're actually talking about first. I think that we would live in a better world if people just decided that they were going to figure out what they were talking about before they decided to start talking about that thing. And once we figured out what we're talking about, then we can make intelligent statements about that thing. So whether our statements are good are dependent on whether our definitions are clear. And in many cases, people don't even know that their statements are untrue because they haven't even looked at the basic building blocks of their statements. So how does this connect to writing? How does this making of statements connect to writing? Well, I'm not trying to be condescending. I'm not trying to be witty or anything like that. But writing is a long sequence of statements. In a few cases, you throw in dialogue where you have questions. In some cases, you do have questions. But in the end, writing is a long sequence of statements that hang together in some sort of logical form. They make sense together. So if we understand how statements are put together, then we can do a better job of writing. And what I am saying right now is what you need to do when you put together statements is you need to make sure you actually know what you are talking about with those statements. You actually need to make sure you know what is at the core of your topic in those statements. I'm not going to say much more about statements themselves because they are the thinnest part of the argument when we talk about argumentation, but they are a necessary part as well. But I'm going to leave you with a quote from Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway told people to write the truest sentence they know. And I cannot see a person writing the truest sentence they know unless they understand logic and unless they understand that the statements they are making, that truest sentence they're trying to write, is actually based on the content of that sentence. What are you writing about? What is that thing exactly? And if we can figure out what we're actually writing about, we can make statements that are true in some sense that Ernest Hemingway understood true to be. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppie, and this is How to Write Good.